I do want to talk a little bit about the Tucker thing because, I watched a lot of Tucker's content prior to agreeing to go on his podcast, because prior to that, I had all these ideas in my head about who Tucker is because I remember him from his neocon days. I remember him from, his Fox News days where he said all sorts of things that I vehemently disagreed with. And I didn't know if it made sense for me to have a conversation with him. So I started listening to his podcast daily and realized he's super remorseful about his neocon days. He apologizes for it on a regular basis. And he speaks to, and I think it's sincere, he speaks to the real struggles of Americans, particularly young Americans who can't afford houses, don't think they can afford to get married and have kids. It is leading to a level of despair in this country that has been completely neglected by our political elite. And let's also keep it real, by our corporate media and mainstream legacy media. So when he decided to have Nick Fuentes on, I kept an open mind, even though I know about all the things that Nick Fuentes has said. I know that he has, celebrated Hitler. I know all that stuff, but I wanted to see, okay, what's going to come out of this conversation? And I feel that there has been this misconception about how Tucker didn't push back against Nick Fuentes at all, when he very clearly did, and drew a distinction between what Tucker Carlson believes and what Nick Fuentes believes. Nick Fuentes still believes, and he said it during this podcast interview, that the problem is this global, organized Jewry. Tucker Carlson pushed back on that and said, no, I totally disagree. And in fact, when you pin this on the Jews, all you do is discredit everyone who is specifically critical of Israel. And so this effort to cancel him, I don't think is really just about Nick Fuentes. I think it's about everything that Tucker has been saying in pushing back against the foreign policy that now several administrations in this country have engaged in, including the fact that we've supported Israel, regardless of who's in power there, regardless of what they have done in that region of the world. That's my take. It doesn't mean that you have to defend Nick Fuentes, but I am defending the idea that two consenting adults sit down and have a conversation without having this organized campaign meant to destroy the interviewer, in this case, Tucker Carlson. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I totally agree with you. And you're especially on the point about, well, on all of it, but especially the thing to focus on here is the thing about how they don't mean it. This isn't about Nick Fuentes at all. This is about Tucker Carlson's turn against Israel and against the war party overall. And they've decided they have something that they think that they can use against him, which parentheses ain't gonna work anyway, Jack. Tough luck. But that's what they're trying to do. And of course, anyone who watched the interview saw the same interview you did, where all this talk about platforming is so ridiculous. The guy's a journalist. The guy's interviewed Ayatollahs and God knows who, right? That's his job, is to interview people who are important in the news. And this guy, this young guy Fuentes, is now, it's undeniable. If you look at his audience size, he is a force to be reckoned with one way or another on the right. And Tucker clearly has been struggling to figure out how to deal with him. And I saw a clip where Fuentes said, sounds believable, I didn't ask Tucker, but seemed like maybe Tucker had asked Max Blumenthal and his wife to write this thing against him back years ago, kind of thing. Tucker's really trying to figure out a way to, do like a Mark Levin and cancel him. And he said in his interview with Candace Owens, I think this guy's a plant. Like he's COINTELPRO. He's sent to make all of us look bad like him for sidling up and agreeing with most of what we say, and then also saying a bunch of crazy stuff, And so, but the problem with that was he had no real evidence for that. And so Tucker, from on high now, Mr. Fox News big shot guy, even said in his criticism, he lives in his mom's basement. So it was a big guy swinging at a little guy, and then he missed. And he actually made a baseless accusation. So then he was in the position where he kind of had to eat a little crow. I think, he didn't tell me this or anything, but I think this is sort of the way I read the situation. After swinging and missing, he kind of had to go ahead and have him on and let the kid, define himself as he would. And then of course, as you say, Tucker, and all anyone has to do is just watch this. People are like, they get a screenshot in their head of, oh no, a platforming happened or something. Watch what happened in the conversation. And as you say, it's Tucker explaining over and over and over again. Well, you say you have the same religion as me, but our religion teaches opposite of what you're saying your conclusions are here. And then it is true that Tucker didn't say as, like, I don't know how this is supposed to work. He brings the guy out to the middle of Maine. You know what I mean? He's not just gonna sit there and beat him over the head. But perhaps he could have said, hey man, you really have crossed the line in some of this stuff you've said about blacks and Jews and Hitler and this and that. Like, this is some pretty, and he didn't hit him that hard on that. But the way I read that was that he was leaving Fuentes space to back down a little bit in a way and say, because in fact, like, check out the difference between the Jews are all a bunch of traitors serving Israel and, well, Sheldon Adelson wasn't a neoconservative, just a Jewish Zionist. And so his Jewishness obviously informs his Zionism somehow. Okay, well, that's true for a lot of Jewish Zionists, that Jewishness and Zionism seem to go together to them. Okay, but what does that say about the millions and millions and millions of American Jews? Doesn't say anything about them at all, does it? It's a completely different way of framing it. And so when Tucker said, okay, well, let's just draw our lines here and see, Fuentes seemed to back down from his own position quite a way. Now
you're right. Yeah, you're right about that. And
in a way, one more thing there is,
sure,
I've actually kind of been mulling this over because I think it represents a real crisis for the right and especially the anti-war and anti-Zionist right. That what are we gonna do with this guy? Before he made sure that he was so beyond the pale that, like, fine, he has his corner over there. But now he's going, yeah, it's me and Tucker and Candace against the war party. And it's like, now listen, man, you're still an avowed Hitlerian and whatever, to whatever degree. And look, I'm not the greatest connoisseur of the guy, but I've seen some pretty astounding clips before, okay? I've not watched hours and hours, but I know about him that, and I know the origin story that Ben Shapiro's what did this to him when he was just a kid. So it's almost a comic book movie. Like, this is where your villain came from, was he was so mistreated unfairly when he was too young, whatever. But now what does the entire anti-war right? And you see there's a giant faction fight on the right where the war party is going after, and not just the war party, but like, more mainstream Republican types are really going after Tucker and everyone anti-Zionist and hanging Fuentes around all of our necks. And it represents a real conundrum of what we're gonna do. Here he's trying to soften and sort of join up with a larger movement, but in a way that can really only cause them nothing but grief, right? To me, It seems like what he should do is he should just go full COINTELPRO against Israel and say, yes, he's a National Socialist. He shares the exact ideology of the Likud party, which is ethno-religious nationalism and exclusivism and collectivism at the expense of the other, which is what he believes in and which is what Benjamin Netanyahu believes in. Richard Spencer, who they previously made poster boy for the so-called alt-right back 10 years ago, he said, well, I don't see a problem with Zionism. I just want Zionism for white people here, that's all. And at one time, he challenged a rabbi at Texas A&M. I think it was a rabbi, it might've been a professor, I forget. But he challenged, I think it was a rabbi at Texas A&M and said, well, do you support open immigration to Israel? And he goes, well, of course. Oh, in fact, what he did was he sat there silent and he couldn't think of a thing to say. And then he just turned around and walked away, handing the point to the Nazi, to an avowed National Socialist. And so if Nick Fuentes really resents Israel, he ought to sidle up to them instead up to Tucker Carlson and friends.
I just think, especially as someone who was very much part of the cancel culture left at one point, especially after the 2016 election, attempting to silence people or censor people or punish people for having conversations, it doesn't work. In fact, all it does is help the very individual you are trying to crush become more and more popular. The only thing that works is engaging in debate, engaging in discussion. And, sunlight really is the best disinfectant. And I'm sorry, how many shows agreed to do sit-down interviews with a literal war criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was wanted by the International Criminal Court, gave softball interviews. And this is a guy who has literally engaged in mass slaughter, including of children. There's no campaign to cancel those shows. And I wouldn't want a campaign to cancel those shows. I covered some of those interviews. I critiqued those interviews, substantively. And then you just get to pushing, you move on, right? But this idea that it is beyond the pale for Tucker Carlson to sit down with, Nick Fuentes. And again, I have huge issues with things that Nick Fuentes has said. But compare him to, again, Netanyahu, who's actually killed people, wiped out entire bloodlines. No pushback on that. It's kind of amazing.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.